This couldn't be a more exciting time, as we finally get to take a look at our first Inazuma character, and Kazuha is one mean samurai you don't want to mess with. But the question is, just how strong and relevant he is in today's Genshin Impact. Let's get something out of the way immediately. The jumping, the bursting, and the damage, all of it feels amazing when using this gentle samurai boy, but there's a few important things that need to be addressed if you want to get the best impression about Kazuha. First of all, the most crucial thing about him is the elemental skill, which in a nutshell does three things for your team. First, there's the ability to group your enemies not just when you unleash it, but also when you do a plunging attack, which deals significant anemo damage, but if that's not enough, one of his passives also enables the skill to absorb first element that comes into contact, and he deals additional elemental damage from both his initial skill and the plunging attack as well. Finally, the second passive boosts elemental damage of your team, depending on what element you swirled, and you're actually able to maintain them separately, so you can for example have Pyro and Cryo elemental damage bonuses. Basically, any element you combo the skill together with, it will deal that damage together with anemo, and your teammates that match the comboed element also get to enjoy a boost as well. But let's not forget something that's even cooler. The samurai gets to leap around with the skill, and because not that many enemies have aerial attacks, you can easily dodge them and save your precious stamina, especially when you're doing time trials like the Abyss. What's also interesting is that depending whether you press or hold the skill, the amount of suction as well as height you'll achieve will differ, and the charging kind of happens really fast, and there's only a few seconds cooldown difference, so most of the time, the hold version was used for field testing. Now it's important to know that his burst will also be able to work together with the elemental damage boosting passive, since he only needs to make swirls and it doesn't matter how he does it. In fact, this is going to be the most common way of getting that passive activated, since the radius of the burst is pretty generous, although not as big as Ganyu's or Albedo's, but it's enough to capture a lot of enemies inside of it, not to mention it also has elemental absorption, so it will constantly keep the absorbed element refreshed for the passive. Which brings us to a quick glance at team building. Initially, some obvious testing was done by using melt and vaporized teams to see how well they perform, and they did work pretty nice, but it was also interesting to see that it's quite viable to use a mono element team, for example, a team of pyro damage dealers along with Kazuha, so that anytime the element gets swirled, you get additional boost in pyro damage, although it was tested with Viridescent Vernier Force set, so you basically end up reducing enemies' pyro resistance, as well as boosting your team's pyro damage for some nice elemental damage. Also, as you would expect, a freeze team works extremely well together with him, and that's not something new, as anemo has been the building block for enabling this composition, so it's great to see it in action, which helps with not just additional crowd control, but also for that extra kick from elemental damage boost. But in reality, it was easy to swap in and swap out Kazuha in nearly any team composition because of how strong his burst is, paired together with a very mobile elemental skill that makes up for some enjoyable gameplay. To be honest, you can do this with Xiao's burst non-stop, but sometimes his gimmick gets old, while Kazuha keeps it fresh since you just quickly swap in, jump, land somewhere, and maybe drop a burst, then continue on with the next character. It's also important to note that aesthetically, his animations are so pleasing to watch, and it's kind of a bummer his potential to act as your main damage dealer is locked behind the 6th constellation, although you can kind of freestyle and use either Chongyun or Bennett with the final constellation to cheat your way through with a different type of elemental damage. But even miHoYo themselves market this samurai as a support, and a good support he is, especially considering he doesn't have a very complex playstyle. However, one thing is clear, he kind of got released during a weird timing, and it's crucial for us to take a look at just how relevant he is for Genshin right now. If you really think about it, when a new character comes out, it probably makes sense to at least look at the current landscape of the game and think how well they will fit in with the rest of the cast. Now, the biggest thing that makes some players think twice before pulling for him is the inevitable Inazuma update that's been thrown into our faces when miHoYo accidentally leaked the newest characters. But what's even worse, if the schedule won't change, then we can also expect to see a live stream for the newest update, and depending on when you're watching this, we might have already seen what's coming next. But in all honesty, haven't we been through all of this so many times already? A new character gets announced and we hurry to weigh the pros and cons, but it's hard to admit the fact that every single one of us is in a unique position, and it can heavily depend what are your expectations from someone like Kazuha or basically any other 5 stars or even 4-star characters. In fact, most of us get influenced not by the skills or abilities, but the way the character looks and feels. Heck, even when Barbara got her own skin, she's definitely been part of the daily commissions gang for the past few weeks. Still, there is a rough evaluation you can do in terms terms of Kazuha's relevancy when it comes to the players themselves, and one interesting way to put this would be how much you have progressed into the game. So for a beginner player who's just exploring the world, making their way through the story, and not really getting bothered with the domains and Spiral Abyss, this samurai boy won't make the biggest impact for you. However, because he will primarily act as your support damage dealer, building him up won't be as costly as a dedicated damage dealer, and because he does dish out quite a lot of damage compared to other supports, he can basically act as your future investment for Abyss and other challenges where he will definitely shine once you're ready to do them. Also, you do gain a wonderful traversal ability from his elemental skill that can make it really easy to collect those pesky oculi, especially once Inazuma comes out. Now when it comes to a regular player, Kazuha is definitely a high priority character. With the most recent changes to elemental mastery in 1.6 update, swirls are absolutely insane right now, and if you can manage to build them up with a decent energy recharge rate, dropping that burst once the cooldown is up is going to be a massive damage output upgrade for your team, as long as you can manage that energy to work for you. Now one thing to consider, since you're still not at the very end of the game, where endgame players have built at least 2 if not more fully functional teams, the additional elemental damage buff you gain from his passive is going to be fickle to say the least, because it does kind of work best when you use it in either mono elements or freeze team to take full advantage of the consistency, and as we know it, building multiple characters from the same element isn't advised until you're at the very end game. Finally, if we talk about those battle-scarred, primo-gem depraved war veterans, the biggest caveat that also applies to the regular players is the question whether you own Venti or not. In fact, you might have heard somewhere that Venti is still a better choice than Kazuha, just because of how high the lazy bards set the bar, but there is the other side of the coin. Who says you can't use them both in the Abyss, especially since we still need 2 teams, and it's been proven from time to time again how crucial Animo can be when you want to save those seconds by grouping the enemies, and of course, even if Kazuha doesn't have the best crowd control, he is still able to group smaller enemies or at least pull them closer to you, as well as offer you air traversal with his elemental skill that allows you to save up stamina instead of dodging attacks, since there aren't that many enemies that can target you above the ground. And if we're on the subject of the Abyss, miHoYo didn't even try to be subtle about it and made floor 11 into complete slaughtering grounds for Kazuha. So if you've been having trouble beating this floor in particular, he will take care of it for you without too much effort. In fact, even floor 12 contains the last chambers, where Animo is amazing to take care of those pesky Abyss mage shields. So in essence, Kazuha is in a special position where we know a lot of new characters will be coming out soon, which kind of makes it hard to decide if he's worth your time, but the good news are, he is a very capable support character that offers viability for a lot of different players. If Kazuha is just a taste test for what's to come in Inazuma, then we're in for a wild ride, because it's honestly refreshing to see a new support character coming out, and a good one at that. And while his gameplay style isn't the most complex and the passive does bring its own set of limitations, he is still able to produce not just damage but also some decent crowd control, and even better, a budget Shao escape route into the air. Now one thing you might be wondering, how well does he compare to other Animo characters like Sucrose and Venti, who have been heavily amplified thanks to the 1.6 buff? And while this type of comparison will be made in a future video, the initial thoughts about it is that Kazuha is pretty much a jack of all trades, or a better definition would be a copycat that took something from each of the Animo characters we already have and created his own type of playstyle. You basically have a sword from Jean, some jumping from Shao, and a good amount of crowd control you would expect from Venti or Sucrose. You could say that Kazuha comes with a less stronger but a free 4-set bonus of the Archaic Petra artifacts set, so that's obviously a huge plus for him, especially once you equip him with the Viridescent 4-set and end up as a serious elemental damage booster. But overall, the Samurai proves himself to be a very mobile character that gives you a nice jump and the ability to manipulate the enemies on the battlefield, as well as allowing you to save that precious stamina for time trials without needing to dodge incoming attacks. What's also great about him is the versatility of his tested builds that allows you to have a healthy mix of elemental mastery in regular stats like critical rate and damage. But when it comes to some cons, compared to other Animo characters, he doesn't really specialize in anything, especially grouping enemies, so don't expect him to be easy to use when you need some crowd control. Also, for those who are thinking of building him into a main damage dealer, you will need to take various different workarounds like using Bennett's 6th Constellation or Chongyun's elemental skill in order to bypass his weak physical damage, and in all honesty, without Kazuha's 6th Constellation, you'll need to jump through several hoops just to use him as your main damage dealer. Still, as a support character, he will fit into so many different team compositions thanks to his easy to adapt playstyle, so expect to see him with a ton of different teammates, since all you really need is anyone who is not a physical damage dealer to take advantage of everything he has to offer. Hope you enjoyed this review of Kazuha, and if you'd like to help out the channel, make sure to subscribe with notifications enabled, and don't forget to gently press the like button. Making these types of videos always takes a lot of time, so your support helps out with YouTube's algorithm. But if you want more content, make sure to follow on Twitter, link in the description. Thanks for watching, and see you very soon.